Okay, I should be in control now. Hopefully we've got everyone in the webinar, have we? So we won't be able to see all of the participants on the screen because I think there's over 80 participants, so it would be a bit congested. Um, so thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to get online and to join in. My name is Andy Renton. I'm the principal at Castletown Law. So I'll be doing a bit of moderating this afternoon, but you'll be glad to hear that I'm not going to talk for very long on these subjects because we are going to have quite a lot of content to get through. So welcome to the webinar. Particular thanks to those attending from around the world and to our speakers, Shemek, Adam, Ojena, Simon, Karen, and Sarah Jane. They've all taken a lot of time to prepare the presentations, and having looked through them, I think there's some really quite interesting points that are going to come out. So please ask questions as we go through in the Q&A tab, which you will have on your screen. We will be recording the content and we will make the presentation available online. We will also make it available on our YouTube channel, and the question and answers will be made available through a link both in the YouTube and on our online links to the webinar. Just a little bit of background. We have come up with this idea that it's an opportune time to have this webinar because in April this year, there was an integrated nuclear infrastructure review in Poland, which took place between the 15th and 25th of April. And during that review, the IAEA report identified that the process in Poland has identified good practices that would benefit other countries developing nuclear power in the areas of contracting, strategic approach, early authorization for technical support organizations, and engagement with the grid stakeholders and industrial involvement. So these are themes that we're seeing in a number of countries where there is a progression towards nuclear energy as a source of decarbonisation and energy sustainability to meet future demand. And I think we have the agenda is fairly obvious, and we'll get there as we go through. Just a little bit about our speakers. GNZ is an independent Polish law firm made up. I think it was started about the same time as Castletown Law, and as with Castletown Law, it's very focused on the energy sector. It's mainly alumni from national and global law firms who have specialist inputs. And we're very pleased that we have at Castletown Law that we have a strong alliance agreement with them. Similarly, Nuclear PL was set up as a company to provide comprehensive nuclear services to the nuclear power sector, and by a group of individuals who have worked extensively in the energy sector in Poland over a number of years. So with them, as part of our alliance in Poland, we think we have a very strong position to support the development of new nuclear in Poland. At Castletown Law, we're very proud of our contributions to the progress of nuclear development over the past few years. We're a relatively young firm, but some of us, as you may see, are older than the age of the firm by quite a long way. We started off in promoting our nuclear initiatives by making a film back in 2019. And since then, we've produced 4 handbooks and we've made a lot of progress in the nuclear sector, as has the nuclear sector. And part of our objective is to sustain and increase the pace of progress towards nuclear energy as a decarbonizing source of energy. I expect I'm not going to go through any more on Castletown Law at the moment. I think you'll be able to read the slides if you want to. I expect each of our speakers will pick up on some of these aspects that were mentioned in the IEAE report as they go through their presentations. As we go through, we will transition between the slides, and I'll pick up as in between speakers. There's a lot to get through today, so I'm going to hand over to our first speakers, Adam and Božena, and I'm particularly interested in hearing about the economic model analysis that Božena has been part of. Although that's not to say that I'm not interested in what Adam's going to say, because I'm sure that's going to be equally interesting. So I will now hand over, hopefully seamlessly, to Adam and Božena, and they can take control of the slides, and I will shut up. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you and be your first speaker today. I'll give you some brief introduction about why do we deal with nuclear power in Poland and why do we see it as an important part of the future of this country. For those of you who are more familiar with the country, it can be a little bit restating the obvious, but just to put everything we are going to talk about into the context, we found this useful. Or we think it is useful. So, nuclear in Poland. It's no mystery to anyone who has learned anything about Polish energy industry, and not only energy industry, energy sources. Poland is a coal country, has been, is, and for a moment still is going to remain. So this is the Polish energy mix according to International Energy Agency, which is of course a reliable source of information. So on one end, you can see that we have done tremendous progress over the last few years, and there is a rapid drive to replace coal with other energy sources. But you can also see quite clearly that a lot remains to be done. Okay, so need for decarbonization seems to be obvious these days, so I'm not going to spend more time on that. But combined with the need to decarbonize, in Poland, we expect that we will still need more and more power in the years to come. This is still the past. Consumption of electricity in the left-hand side per capita, in the right-hand side per sector. It has been consistently growing. Of course, there was a crisis of 2008. Of course, there was COVID, but otherwise it is growing, and we can expect it will keep growing. So we have 2 drivers behind our energy transition. One is to cover the growth, possibly in a sustainable manner. Another is to replace the coal. Now, what will happen in the future? I left my crystal ball in another office, but I have one in the picture. It's not a real one, but works just as well as the real one. So I think we don't need to be worried about that. So I would say it will keep growing. And I can say that much with certainty, but how much it will grow, there are different forecasts. In the left-hand side, you can see the energy policy of Poland until 2040, a very interesting historical document, which was outdated at the moment it was enacted, but still showing us some forecasting. In the right-hand side, from an independent think tank doing some modeling stuff and numbers wizardry. And they also indicate that for different scenarios, the power consumption in Poland will keep growing from the current levels of something like 170 terawatt hours per year to roundabouts between 200, 250 in 2040s, 50s. Of course, how much exactly, we don't know. But it creates a picture. First, we need to replace what we already have, most of that's the coal. And secondly, we need to cover the growth. Of course, nobody's going to tell you really reliably how much the growth will be, because, for instance, we don't know how the introduction of e-vehicles in Europe is going to go, and that will be a very, very important factor for this. Just one, and of course, there are others. But everybody expects it will keep growing. Just to make you give you some context, current per capita energy consumption in Poland is among the lower values in the European Union. It is at a little bit less than 4.5 megawatt hours per person, which is a little bit less than UK, nearly half less than in Germany, and several times less than in the United States. Yeah, we will be catching up most likely. Now, there is another driver. Of course, the climate issues are important, and we would really like, I think, that the policy is driven by climate consideration, sustainability, and so on. But except for that, which is always a subject of some political haggling and uncertainties, we can see that now that certain commitments perhaps are not as firm as we had believed just a few years back. We really have a hard technical problem to resolve. So we really need to let go of our coal-fired power stations, not only because they are coal-fired, but because they are old. These are the expected decommissionings of capacity. Once more, this is excerpt from the energy policy of Poland. Of course, you can try hard to make those plants run a little bit longer, but it does not change the fact that most of our coal-fired capacity, most of the surviving coal plants, will become too old to operate within next 15 to 20 years, and that means we need to replace them with something. Obviously, we'll be replacing them to a large extent with renewables, but unfortunately, this is not going to do the trick altogether. So we already, as you could see in the energy mix slide, we are already using quite a lot of renewables. Of course, it's not quite a lot compared to, I don't know, Iceland or Norway, but compared to what we did just a few years back, the progress is very fast, and that's a good thing. And we can have really good weeks when quite a lot of our power is generated from renewables, and that will get better. So in the left-hand side, you can see 1 week. Those are diagrams taken from the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. So here you can see solar in yellow, and this gray-greenish shade is our onshore wind. We don't have any offshore yet. So there are weeks where the generation of renewables is quite okay, but there are also weeks, you can see week 4, 2023, when there is nearly no renewables. And the statistical analysis of the Polish power system reveals quite consistently that we can expect to have approximately 6-7 days without availability of renewable power. And this is just a feature of our geography, and we need to learn to deal with that. So how can we deal with that? Well, not with available energy storage capacities and nothing which is expected in near future. So now we are storing electricity for the system in a scale of minutes. We might hope eventually to go into the scale of hours, but not in the scale of a week. So for the foreseeable future, our energy policy must ensure that we can ride through this kind of period when there's no wind and no sun. This is because this is not going to change. So basically, Poland has two choices: to rely fully on gas for that, or to contribute nuclear to the mix and reduce the share covered by renewables plus gas, which are unfortunately coming together. So it's as simple as that. We need nuclear to do this particular job. So yeah, clean weather independent grid electricity. This is a standard selling line for nuclear power, but this is really what we need in this country, and this is what we need nuclear for, because literally more nuclear will mean less gas, and except for and apart from the climate considerations, well, you know, with Polish geography and location, there are not so many directions we can get gas from, and well, some of them are pretty problematic. Stability and security of supplies are also quite standard features of nuclear. Then, is district heat an option for nuclear in Poland? Well, mostly nuclear power in Poland is expected to feed the grid. Okay, there are ideas that it will feed certain industrial customers. The ownership issue is open, and financing issue is open. So it could be perhaps in the future some PPAs or whatever solutions for sales of electricity. So the electricity itself doesn't have to heat the power exchange, obviously, but in technical terms, it will go to the grid. It will be grid synchronized plants. It's not going to be off grid. Now, district heat, to some extent, yes, we have quite a lot of developed district heating in Poland, and nuclear seems like a wonderful option from the physical point of view, because we don't have so many options to feed district heating grids in emission-free way. However, even so-called small nuclear reactors are pretty big. So even if we have a small nuclear plant of, let's say, 200, 300 megawatts electrical, that means like 700, 800 megawatts of heat available in full cogeneration, and there are very few systems which can accept this amount of heat. Of course, whenever possible, it should be used, but it's not going to be the primary application of nuclear in Poland anytime soon. Industrial heat, there are some ideas, there are some concepts to, for example, power hydrogen production facilities in the future, perhaps. Although for now, there is some complexities here. Again, size. Nuclear plants are typically quite big compared to the demand for heat from any specific consumer. And then there are certain collocation challenges like insurance, like laws, evacuation and eventuality plans. We had one attempt already where the local industrial heat consumer approached whether they would like to have a collocated nuclear power plant. After due consideration said, well, thank you, but no thank you. Perhaps in the future it will change when the drive to decarbonize heat sources becomes stronger. But as the first customer or the first application of nuclear power in Poland is certainly going to be generation of electricity and feeding it into the grid in physical terms. As I said, I'm not going to discuss the commercial issues and how it will be traded. Then hydrogen, okay, specifically, yes, if it is developed, then obviously. But first of all, clean power. Now, as for the support and policy in Poland, nuclear power has been on the table and has been in Polish political strategic documents now for more than 1.5 decades. So we had the first Polish nuclear power program officially enacted in 2014, the second revision from 2020. As you can see, the graphical format has been upgraded. As you cannot see, but it is also the case, the ministry name changed, and it's still in the future. So it got considerably delayed to original plans. It's not so that nothing is happening. The main program is being pursued, but perhaps not as vigorously as it could be. Recently, the drive has been back there, and we have seen increased interest. And one good thing, really optimistic thing about nuclear power in Poland, which is perhaps not so usual around the world, is that basically all significant political forces in Poland agree that nuclear should be a part of our energy mix. So it is not a point of contention whether or not to build nuclear, but of course there are some details which need to be where there are some different ideas, and definitely I think I can say we could do a little bit more as a country, especially in longer term, to adopt nuclear power somewhat faster than what is actually happening. Still, the political support is there, and we do not expect any political action against nuclear power. Sorry.
That's you on 2 minutes, Adam. Please.
Sure. So as for the public support, it's also very good. It's probably the best in the world at the moment, or one of the best. This is the recent poll made for the Ministry of Climate and Environment, when that ministry still controlled nuclear power, and we reached 90%. We hit the 90% level for support. In some other polls, it is a little bit less, but still it is very, very high, and you can hardly find a country where the public support is higher. It is also in the location of the first expected power plant. As you would expect, it is somewhat lower than national average, but still in a municipality in the left-hand side, and in the powiat, which is more or less a county size administrative unit in Poland, majority of inhabitants are for nuclear. So where do we have problems, or should I say, in corporate terms, challenges? Well, political action, as I said, is often delayed. So it is pro-nuclear. We don't have strong anti-nuclear actions in any major political forces, but political action is delayed. We have outdated policy and we have quite limited coordination between individual projects, of which we have at the moment many. We have a technical challenge or technical legal challenge. We need to localize technologies and scope of, because we don't have Polish nuclear technologies, obviously. Some of them are strongly technical reasons. So if we have American design for 60 Hertz power system, we need to redesign for 50 and there's no way around it. In some cases, adjustments of law, applicability of local civil codes can change the requirements for redesigning and localization. We have, as I mentioned, limited coordination between projects, of which we have many, and they may create excessive burden on authorities, including licensing authorities. The challenge of economics, I'm not going to talk about details, but you probably are all familiar with the at least general challenges of financing projects and finding a place for nuclear in the EU energy market, which is not an easy task. And then adjustments to the licensing process. We have quite a lot of law in place. My colleague Przemek will be talking about that in detail. We are now testing that by fire, but certainly certain adjustments will be necessary to ensure smooth and problem-free investments in the nuclear power stations in Poland. And that's a good moment to stop talking from my end and let my colleagues specialized in finance and law to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was almost exactly on your allotted time, so thank you for sticking to that. It's going to be very helpful if ever others can do the same. And as you'll appreciate, Adam's crashed a lot of stuff into that presentation, and well done for getting through it very quickly. That was it was really quite an interesting dynamic where you see the historic stuff going against the modern stuff. So Bożena's now going to talk a bit more about the economic side, so I'll hand over to her, and hopefully she will be on the screen to take over the slides next.
Yeah, but I can't see my presentation.
Okay.
Okay, that's the one. Thank you for inviting me for the meeting, and also thank you for the possibility to present you the SACH model, which is the Polish innovative approach to the business models problem. My name is Bożena Horbaczewska. I work in the Warsaw School of Economics, and my dean always says that it is the best economic university in Poland. So let's go further. I don't have my control, sorry. Yes. So before we started to think about the Polish model, when I say we, I mean me and Łukasz Sawicki, who is co-author of the model. We spent a lot of time. Analyzing models used and proposed for the nuclear business all over the world, and our point is that we can divide all the models into two different groups. The group number one is the, let's say, traditional business model built from the perspective of the investor, with the main goal as a profit. And in fact, the energy production is just a way to achieve the profit, to achieve the main goal. And the group number two is the group of models which are built from the perspective of end users, from the perspective of energy and consumers. And we have a lot of examples all over the world. First of all, I'd like to mention the Mankala model from Finland, because for us it was very good model, but not possible to implement in Poland. These models, this group of models, let's say quasi-cooperative models, are built from the perspective, as I said, of the end user, and the main goal of in this kind of model is not the profit, but the production of energy to meet the needs of energy consumers. So we started to think how to solve the problem for Poland. We took it as an intellectual challenge, and thinking about the model, we just took the frame of the energy policy of Poland and the Polish nuclear power program, which Adam said a moment before. And in the energy policy of Poland, it is said that the energy should be delivered in economical justified manner. For us, it means that the price of the energy should be the lowest possible. And we also believe that the right rule from the perspective of the society is that if the society gives some money to support the project, also the benefits, if they are, they should be delivered to the whole society. And also, if there is an entity taking risk, the entity should be entitled to take benefits from the project. And the shortest possible description of the Sacho model is that the state or the equivalent of the state builds an NPP and sells it to the electricity consumers before the grid connection, and from that moment the energy consumers offtake the electricity generated in their own NPP, and they pay only the production cost with not any profit. So in fact, it is a state-initiated and optionally controlled private cooperative of end users. And the name of the model, the Sacho model, comes from our surnames, Sawicki and Horbaczewska. And as I told you, we started to we took the frame of the Polish energy policy, but it was let's say the base for us. And the frame for the basic concept, but in fact we went. I mean, we developed the model, and the next models, the next versions of the models, went far beyond this frame. But let's start with the basic concept. In the basic concept, it is a state who creates the SPV. And the state works as an initial investor. The state takes all the risk which can be identified in the process of building, and before the grid connection, the initial investor gradually sells shares to electricity consumers. If you would like to take a picture, we have an ownership on the vertical axis, and in the first stage, the state is the sole investor, and then as project goes by and the time goes by, the government sells shares to final investors. And selling the shares to final investors, the state obtains some funds which may be used for example, financing the first stage of the construction of further nuclear units, and we named the mechanism as reuse of funds. So this is the basic concept, and I was very often asked the question, when is the best moment to change ownership? And the answer is very simple. When the risk level is acceptable for the buyer, of course, the project should be transparent for both sides, both sides, and when the price is appropriate for both sides. So, in fact, we do not have such specialists, such firms able to be a consultant. So it is a great role for for firms, for entities who have some knowledge and experience in the nuclear business. And as I said, it was the basic concept. We developed many other versions of the project, and the idea is the same. The idea is to change the ownership structure, but just like cakes, they have the same shape, but different tastes and colors. And I'd like to shortly present you some other versions. Here is the most detailed one, as with the state as as the initial investor and many different groups of final investors.
Bożena, that's 2 minutes till you finish. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And there is plays a big role for financial institutions as intermediate investors, taking risks from the states and then selling shares to final investors. A place for a permanent investor who invests and wants to get electricity after the grid connection. Private initial investor, a vendor, for example, which does good work for the creditability of the project, and the very, good example of how a stock exchange could be used to assess the price of shares. And of course, a combination of above versions are also possible. The SAHO model has 2 slides of advantages, but I'm going to mention only 2 of them, number 4, number 5. This model ensures the electricity offtake for NPP, which is a problem as we know, and provides stable revenues for the NPP company. And in fact, it's all, there are some words about us and the publication, the first one publication about the SAHO model. If you are interested in, I would like to welcome you, to invite you to the sahomodel.com page. There are many other information about the SAHO model, a disclaimer, and thank you very much.
Bożena, I think that's really interesting. I mean, my immediate thoughts on that are that this model could have a lot of application within advanced nuclear technologies, where the huge cost of gigawatt power stations is not involved, and the ownership is much more attainable by state at the early stages. So look forward to seeing if we can help make that model work, both in Poland and internationally. I'm being brief because I see the agenda hasn't allowed any time for me to speak in between speakers. So we are going to move straight on to Simon, who is hopefully now in control of his screen and the presentation, and I'll let Simon take you through that.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, I'm just waiting for control, but okay. My name is Simon Stutterford, also from Castletown Law. I'm an environmental regulatory lawyer by background. Been focusing on the nuclear sector for the last 15 years or so. A mixture of private practice, but also industry experience, decommissioning. So I was general counsel for Energy Solutions, which was the parent body for the Magnox fleet in the UK. But also new build. I've been involved in new build. So I was part of the in-house legal team at Horizon Nuclear Power, helping them with nuclear site licensing and permitting issues. More recently at Castletown Law, we've been involved an awful lot with advanced nuclear technologies, so both small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. We helped set up a group in the UK. And last year, and I think particularly of interest in relation to this presentation, we were working in Estonia, helping them to develop a regulatory framework and drafting their nuclear law. So the theme of my presentation, if I can get back to that first slide, is what might be required to accommodate advanced nuclear technologies, and based on that experience in Estonia, but also other jurisdictions. So although I can't seem to get back to that first slide, I do know what's on it. So I'm going to be covering today, there we go, looking at what a revised national nuclear legal framework might look like, thoughts about a new approach to licensing, and Adam mentioned that in his initial presentation, potential for a new approach to citing, a quick look at the review of the nuclear liability regime and its application to new nuclear technologies, and then some other challenges. So firstly, if we look at what might be required in terms of a revised legal framework at the national level, again, just waiting for this slide here, there it is. This current legal framework may indeed need some updating. So I've just listed here a couple of the principal laws, the Atomic Law of 2000, and then the Act of 29th June 2011 relating to investments for nuclear facilities. But also below that is a whole series of secondary legislation, and I've just listed one here, the regulation of 2012, which covers the scope of assessment of site requirements for location of nuclear facilities and requirements for site evaluation reports. So these are examples, so both at the primary level, principal laws, and secondary legislation, where we may need to see some changes. More specifically, sorry, just gone on ahead there. What might the, so I'm just waiting for the slide to go back. Yeah, what might the revised legal framework look like at the national level in a little more detail? This slide hopefully will come up shortly, but there are some potential amendments that may be required to cover some specific topics. So the first one, and again, I'm sorry, I'm just waiting for the slide to come back. Seem to be rather stuck.
Simon, I think we'll take control back to Lee, because it may be your connection isn't managing that properly.
Yeah.
So
okay, thanks.
Control back to Lee if you just say next slide when you want to move forward.
Okay, so we should be on, I think it's slide 3, a revised legal framework at the national level, please. I can perhaps start speaking to that one, and as it comes up, hopefully you'll see the text. But the first one relates to the potential for any government pre-approval, so what might otherwise be called a decision in principle requirement. And we've heard from Adam already in terms of the Polish nuclear power program that there is a sort of an overview determination in relation to general plans of Poland on nuclear power plants, but I'm looking at something more specific than that. The second of those items, and I'm afraid we're still a little ahead in terms of the slides, is accommodation that might be required for test or research or prototype reactors. Then we have the potential for revisions required to licensing or pre-licensing, the pre-licensing approach. And currently at the moment, there does exist, you can request the regulator in Poland for general opinion on technology issues or other aspects connected with the construction of the plant, but that is not a sort of formal pre-licensing process, which might be useful. In terms of citing arrangements, Lee, if you're able to go back still, I'm afraid. There we go, that's the right slide, thanks very much. We may be looking at changes to siting arrangements, particularly because of emergency planning zones for advanced nuclear technologies. Nuclear liability limits, that's an interesting one. So currently the operator liability limit in Poland is set at 300 million special drawing rights, which is approximately 370 million euros. That's under the Vienna Convention. That's also incorporated in Polish law. The question is, though, what might be the appropriate limit for an advanced nuclear technology? You know, is there an answer? Is there a case for it to be lower than that level? Review of regulator powers will undoubtedly be required. Review of the position on the export of radioactive materials. I'm going to touch on that a little later. And then finally, there needs to be consideration for alignment with new nuclear technologies, and therefore we're looking at, you know, streamlining for the regulatory processes. Next slide, please, Lee. Thank you. So, mentioned licensing already. There is a challenge in relation to licensing as well as an opportunity, and the challenge really comes about the current approach to licensing, which, as we know, are designed for large conventional gigawatts. We have what I refer to as the double licensing problem. So licensing process that takes place in both the manufacturer, developer country, but also the installation country where that advanced nuclear technology is going to be deployed. There are definitely some advantages in relation to pre-licensing. The UK has a pre-licensing process called generic design assessment. So does Canada, the vendor design review process. But could that be simpler? Standardization, harmonization. There's a lot of work on this that's been done by the World Nuclear Association Cordell Group, but also the IAEA NISI initiative, as well as the EU Commission's Industrial Alliance for SMRs. Is that the answer? Well, it might be the long-term goal, but there's also, I would say, there's an alternative approach, and we are seeing an awful lot of that, and that's about increased collaboration with potential oversight from the IAEA and joint regulatory approaches on specific topics. And we've seen that with both the US and the Canadian example of topical reports on GE Hitachi's BWXR 300 technology, but also the NEWARD, the EDF NEWARD design, where we've got, I believe, 7 regulators looking at specific topics. So if we could move on, please, Lee. A new approach to siting, I mentioned that. Well, this really needs to accommodate the specific characteristics of new nuclear technologies and indeed new applications, both industrial and non-industrial. There's also scope for co-location with industry. That's part of the appeal or the potential appeal of advanced nuclear technologies. Storage options is something that needs to be considered. And all of this in the context sometimes of remote applications. So do we have effective site policies for off-grid SMR deployment in remote areas? What about deployment limits? How many might be permitted per state or per council? And very much in the context of safety requirements. So again, mentioning the emergency planning zone approach that might be required. And in this respect, consider the work that the NRC has done in relation to NuScale's Voyager, where it allowed a much reduced emergency planning zone. Next slide, please, Lee. A brief word on potential review of the nuclear liability regime. So Poland is a party to the Vienna Convention on civil liability, but also the protocol to amend the Vienna Convention, and indeed the joint protocol, which links the Vienna Convention with the Paris Convention. But that we have at present an international civil nuclear liability regime that lacks uniformity because it's divided between both the IAEA and the OECD conventions. And what does that mean? Well, it means in practice that we currently have inconsistencies in relation to the minimum liability amount as damages for a nuclear power plant operator. So that's come back to that same question. What is the correct limit of liability for operators of new nuclear technologies? That decision could indeed impact investments, deployments, and lead to SMR manufacturers forum shopping, essentially looking for the best, let's say, more permissive regime. Is a harmonized global liability legal regime the solution? Well, there have been attempts over the years, and in theory, the Convention on Supplementary Compensation was designed to provide the solution to this harmonized global liability legal regime. But as at present, we only have 11 parties to that convention. Significant parties, though, including Canada, the United States, Japan, and the UAE. But nevertheless, we don't have at present a globalized liability legal regime. Lee, if you could move the slide, please. Thank you. There are also other challenges. If we think of safeguards and non-proliferation issues, what should be the appropriate certification approach in a factory setting, bearing in mind these advanced nuclear technologies are going to be built in a modular design approach? What about verification? And again, remote applications, how might that apply in practice? I mentioned here a review of transboundary regulatory issues. This is in connection with the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management, which currently means that contracting parties have agreed that the country that discharges the spent fuel and receives the benefit of the power generated bears the responsibility for its management, including disposal. But the Joint Convention at present does not provide for the commercial transfer of used fuel for disposal. Next slide, please.
Simon, that's you 2 minutes up. I know you've been disrupted, but
that's okay. I should still make it. So some countries currently, such as Russia and UK, do accept transfer of used fuel for reprocessing, but importantly, not for disposal. And in most countries, the import of radioactive waste is prohibited. So a potential solution might be for the state of origin to enact national laws consenting to the possibility of used spent disposal returns, which might in itself need amendment to Article 27 of the Joint Convention. Ideally, what you would have is a newcomer nuclear state signing bilateral treaties with SMR manufacturer state of origin and also with transit states. We need to consider adaptation of waste rules to fit new fuel types for advanced modular reactors. And then finally, a word on technology transfers and challenges for SMRs. Under international security regulations, there are restrictions on the transfer of sensitive technologies, which includes nuclear equipment, material, and technology. And often that's done through embargoes and potential barriers, but also export tariffs, domestic tax adjustments, subsidies or restrictions on foreign investment, and technical regulations and standards. So again, these are all challenges. Next slide, please. So these are some of the challenges presented by new nuclear technologies. And just to recap, so we will undoubtedly see revisions required to national nuclear legal framework in some of the areas that I mentioned. We will undoubtedly need to see a new approach to licensing and indeed pre-licensing, potentially a more formal process. We will need to see a new approach to siting. And then finally, the issues that I mentioned in relation to the nuclear liability regime will need looking at, and indeed the potential challenges around the application of new nuclear technologies caused by safeguards issues and technology challenges there. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through that, and apologies that the technology didn't quite live up to expectations. We are moving now straight on to the view of regulation from other jurisdictions. I think Simon's going to continue on that, and then Karen and Sarah Jane are going to bring up the presentations from their point of view. So we'll just move on because I think we've got a good head of steam up and we're covering a lot of ground. So hopefully we can continue. And Simon, if you want to take.
Yeah, Lee, hopefully you can carry on to present for me. Thank you. So I'm going to cover here essentially the UK angle in terms of regulation, and that'll be followed by speakers from Estonia and Canada, so we can see we'll have a nice sort of view across all of those jurisdictions. I'm going to cover some recent developments in the UK, what this might mean for advanced nuclear technologies, and then finally some thoughts as to what more might be needed. Next slide, please. So the UK government introduced the Civil Roadmap Route to 2050 in January this year. And I think a theme that really runs through it, certainly in the introduction, is about picking up again on the potential of nuclear energy, which it's fair to say in the UK has been rather stop-start since the 1980s, really. note that the last new build was EDF Sizewell B project, which was finally commissioned in 1995. But the civil roadmap sets out a very ambitious target of 24 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2050. It also endorsed in that civil roadmap, along with 20 other nations, including the US and France and the UAE, the net zero nuclear declaration, which called for a global tripling of nuclear energy by 2050. So the civil roadmap provides both long-term objectives and also immediate, as in next 12-month goals. And I set those out on the slide, some of which I will cover a little bit later. So the launch of 2 consultations on siting and route to market, very important. Reference to a nuclear skills task force report, completion of the GBN SMR competition, some of you may have heard of that, which we'll cover a little bit later. There's an aim to reach final investment decision on Sizewell C before the end of this parliament, or the end of the parliament, monitoring of Hinkley Point C, and then finally publishing a response on the consultation on nuclear decommissioning and managing radioactive substances. Next slide, please. In terms of the long-term goals, well, the first one of those is to explore one more large-scale reactor project. And in a sense, the UK government just about met that commitment before the call for a general election by nominating Wilber in North Wales as the site of the next large-scale project. There's an aim to secure investment decisions to deliver 3 to 7 gigawatts every 5 years from 2030 to 2044. And just pause for a moment and think what that means. That means at least one Hinkley Point C, which is 3.2 gigawatts in total, or its equivalent every 5 years. Developing government policy is also a long-term goal to support investment in advanced nuclear technologies following the 2 consultations that I mentioned. Next slide, please. A word on Great British Nuclear, some of you may have heard of this. So this body was launched in the spring of 2023. It's an arm's length body. Its purpose is to drive delivery of nuclear projects on behalf of the UK government. And its role was set out in the Energy Act of 2023 to facilitate the design, construction, commissioning and operation of nuclear energy generation projects. Its current focus is very much the SMR competition. I'll mention that shortly. And its role includes accessing sites and establishing delivery capability. So it's a project delivery vehicle in theory. So with both delivery and advisory functions. But there are still questions that remain over its remit. Will it, for example, be exclusively focused on large gigawatt and SMRs in relation to the SMR competition, to the detriment potentially of advanced modular reactors? Will it be able to free up sites, which is clearly essential for a number of these advanced nuclear technologies? And will it indeed have the required funding and resources? Remains to be seen. Next slide, please. So, and the SMR competition itself, well, this was launched in the summer of 2023. It's a technology selection process to select those technologies most likely to achieve final investment decision by 2029 and to deliver operational projects in the mid-2030s. As you can see on the slide, 6 vendors were shortlisted. I'm sure all of you will be familiar with those companies. I'm not going to go through them. And those selected technologies will benefit from close partnership with GBN. Important, I think, to note that GBN reserves the right to make up to 4 awards, and most people in the industry, indeed we've heard it from GBN themselves, anticipate that we're looking at 2 or 3 awards potentially. In terms of there's co-funding will be available to the selected technology partner through a co-funding agreement, and the intention is to award 2-stage contracts to technology partners for the development of their specific designs. That tender is still live. Actually, an update on that, the deadline for submitting project documentation has now been pushed back from the original date of 24th of June to the 8th of July to accommodate the call for general election in the UK. And GBN will assess to determine which bidders to negotiate with before inviting final tenders. And we're expecting to have an announcement of successful bidders later in this year, so 2024. So again, some questions around this. Has this speeded up the delivery prospects for SMRs, or is it actually putting it back a stage of this idea of a competition? What about those SMR designs that aren't selected? And what about AMRs? What's their potential route to market? Next slide, please. So the two consultations that I mentioned, the first one was on siting. And there's
2 minutes, if you don't mind.
Thank you. And there's a need for a new national, that should say policy rather than planning statement, NPS, applicable to new nuclear power stations expected to deploy beyond the current EN6 2025 deployment limit. Key policy changes, well, it broadens the scope for potential EN7, which itself will be subject to consultation, to apply to both gigawatt and also small modular reactors. It empowers developers to select sites for nuclear development using criteria, as opposed to the current process where we have nominated sites, 8 in the UK. And it removes deployment time limits in the NPS to encourage long-term support. Next slide, please. The second one of those consultations is on a route to market for advanced nuclear technologies. The aim of the consultations is to explore what steps can be taken to enable different routes and to explore the uses for advanced nuclear technologies, so different uses. There's a recognition that advanced nuclear technologies offer new uses beyond on-grid electricity, and there's a proposal for a pre-regulatory engagement, which I'll mention briefly. There's also reference to opportunities and challenges for streamlining regulation. And finally, there's a recognition that a number of projects may be privately financed and funded. Next slide, please. I will try and cover this swiftly, but there's reference to a review of current UK regulatory processes and streamlining efforts. So the civil route map focuses on streamlining. It's launched what it calls Smarter Regulation Challenge. I'll pick out a few of these. So OMR is to streamline the GDA and licensing process. There's a reference to the early regulatory engagement process. I'll mention that briefly. And there's a specific reference to guidance on use of overseas regulatory assessment and expectation for moving from a two-step GDA straight through to licensing and permitting. I will skip GDA and licensing for now. So next slide, please. The early engagement process, I think, is worth mentioning. It's a framework available to any party requesting early engagement, and it consists of 3 tiers: a 1-day engagement process, more detailed regulatory process and technical engagements, and then finally the 3rd tier is a preliminary design review process. Again, I'd make the point this is to be recommended. The question is whether it will speed up or slow down deployment, and hopefully not the latter. Next slide, please. A lot of examples here on the slide of collaboration with the UK government and other jurisdictions, and I'm not going to go through any of those. Next slide, please. And also collaboration at the regulatory level. So ONR has formal information exchange arrangements with the regulators listed on this slide. And of note, most recently in March 2024, the Office for Nuclear Regulation signed a trilateral memorandum of cooperation with both the NRC and CNSC to collaborate on the assessment of small modular reactor and advanced modular reactor designs. Next slide, please. So that's the status quo. That's where the UK is at present. The question really is what more is needed? And I've just set these out, my own thoughts as to what might be needed. Quick decisions on the SMR competition, clearly. A genuine route to market for advanced modular reactors. We need to see continued policy support from government, whatever the shade of that new government is. Site availability for advanced nuclear technologies is key. And then finally, mentioned here, improvements on streamlined regulatory processes. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well done, Simon. There's a lot to get through on that, so I think covered it incredibly well, and hopefully people who are looking at this will be able to go back and take a bit more in from your slides. We're going to move on now quickly to, I think it's Karen next, is speaking on the experience from the work that we were involved in and her ongoing involvement in Estonia. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Andrew. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name, could you back in the first slide, please? My name is Karin Muru, and I work for the Estonian Environmental Board, which is the regulatory body responsible for radiation safety issues in the country. My organization's task is to implement state policies and ensure compliance with the environmental, nature conservation, and radiation safety regulations. We also develop and update legal acts and other documents governing these sectors. Mr. Elka Runnel, the coordinator of the nuclear energy working group in the country, was not able to attend this meeting, unfortunately, and therefore I will be delivering this presentation instead.
Karen, I
So
think there's maybe a problem with your microphone. I don't know if your microphone's working properly. It seems you may be not getting picked up properly.
So can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but I think it's a remote mic here. Sound we're hearing.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
That's much better. Thank you very much. Okay, so next slide, please. Although we have good cable connections with the neighboring countries and we are making efforts to install renewables, Estonia's primary source of domestic energy production is the fossil fuel oil shale. And as an EU member state, we are committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. Therefore, we are exploring strategies to decarbonize our power generation. And in April 21, the Estonian government formed an interministerial nuclear energy working group to evaluate the feasibility of using nuclear energy in Estonia beyond 2030. The working group included top representatives from almost every ministry and relevant authority. Their goal was to figure out if the nuclear power plant could be built in Estonia and under what conditions. Working group presented their findings and recommendations at the end of the last year. And the main conclusions indicated that with the timely planning, adequate funding, political support, and public approval, building a nuclear reactor in Estonia is feasible. And considering the country's electrical grid, the small modular reactors are the only suitable option. The next step is for the parliament to decide whether Estonia would accept the nuclear energy, and the resolution adopted yesterday evening expressing support for the initiation preparation for the introduction of the nuclear energy in Estonia and establishing appropriate legal framework. But I have to add that this decision does not grant the right to build nuclear power plant in Estonia. Next slide, please. The decision made yesterday is only the first step in the long process. Other decision-making points will be introduced in the following phases, giving Parliament the opportunity to review this decision and abandon further developments. Among other things, they have the right to decide which decisions they want to be taken in Parliament and which at the government on lower levels. Next slide, please. As a result of the Parliament's good vote on yesterday, introducing nuclear energy, we will proceed with the development of nuclear regulatory authority. Capacity building and adoption of the relevant legislation. Next slide, please. On the basis of the public procurement contract concluded with the Estonian law firm Trinity and Castletown Law from UK, our current legal framework was analysed and draft nuclear law was prepared in 2022-23. The objective was to analyse the existing legal framework related to use of radiation sources, radioactive waste management, as well as non-nuclear legislation. Based on this analysis, necessary improvements were identified to establish an appropriate legal framework for the nuclear energy program, in accordance with relevant laws and international standards. During this process, a total of 22 different pieces of legislations were identified that needed to be amended or supplemented. Next slide, please. The draft law, named as Nuclear Energy and Safety Act, provided by the Trinity and Castletown Law, underwent review by the agency during the intermission in October 23, and the agency's legal department in March 24. The preliminary plan of legislative procedure, how to proceed with the act, is as follows, but having in mind that the timetable is open to change. So in the third quarter on 24, we will form a sub-working group to focus on nuclear law. From the fourth quarter of 24 to the first quarter of 25, we will gather input and initial feedback from stakeholders on the draft law intent. In the second half of the 25, we collaborate with stakeholders to draft legislation, and finally, the aim is to pass the law in second quarter of 26. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay.
So 2 minutes left, Karen, thank you.
Okay. Okay. According to our current plan and in order of priority, the regulatory authority will be established in early 25 with the necessary legal framework in place to ensure efficient functioning. At the same time, by the end of 25, we aim to address siting issues, making changes to laws concerning planning and environmental impact assessments. Next, we will focus on construction phase, updating laws and regulations related to building codes and safety standards. And finally, we will turn our attention to the operation phase, where we will establish operation guidelines and regulations. Next slide, please. And in wrapping up, I would like to say some words about the importance of the international cooperation, especially for the country like ours, just starting in the nuclear field. Firstly, we are working closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This involves following the agency's standards and guidelines, attending training sessions, and using their expert missions. We had a mission in October 23, which was very helpful in assessing our infrastructure needs for the nuclear power program. Our partnership with US through the first program, led by Department of State, is focused on building our nuclear capacity. Recently, Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Estonian Environmental Board signed a cooperation agreement in May this year, which will strengthen our regulatory framework even further. The Finnish Radiation Nuclear Safety Authority offers us beneficial consultations, report review services, various analysis, and etc. As Finland is updating its legislation to accommodate SMRs, we are also closely monitoring these developments. We have also a memorandum of understanding with Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission signed in May last year. This agreement supports sharing of knowledge in nuclear safety and regulation. So, Japan also plays a significant role in our development. They provide nuclear energy seminars, technical visits, which help us gain practical insights and knowledge. And finally, we are exploring potential cooperation with France, specific focus on human resource development. So all these connections are helping us grow and become more informed in nuclear industry. And next slide, please. I think this is the final one. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Karen. That's a very, very helpful way of looking at how you get through the process. And we're now going to hear from Sarah Jane, who's actually been through this process in Canada and has been instrumental in devising the way in which the Canadian regulatory system is now helping the industry very significantly in getting through the deployment of advanced technologies in Saskatchewan, which I know is Sarah Jane's home state, but in other states also, so Ontario, etc. So over to Sarah Jane, and I think Lee's going to control the slides from now on, Shemek, so she'll control yours also. So.
Awesome. Thanks very much. So happy to be here this afternoon to talk about the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's regulatory approach to small modular reactors and to new nuclear power plants, and also the importance of international collaboration. So next slide, please, Lee. So in this slide, I'm not going to walk through all of the projects, but Canada is certainly seen currently as a leader in SMR development. We're currently reviewing 3 applications, including 1 license to construct. And so this is our first license to construct application since the early 90s. And so it's a first of a kind project for us. And it's been a really great learning experience. Next slide, please. So when we looked at how we're going to prepare as Canadians for new nuclear, having a long experience with CANDU plants, but not a lot of experience in other technologies, is we really look to our international like-minded colleagues to be able to work closely with them, to be able to gain information, and then for us to be able to share our learnings and our preparations with others. So we have multilateral agreements, a trilateral agreement with ourselves, the US and the UK. And this is something that we're very proud of. We meet on a monthly basis to be able to share projects, either the 3 of us together or just two of the 3 countries working closely. And it's really allowed us to be able to bring collaboration to the next level. We also have a number of bilateral agreements. I've just put 2 here as an example. So one is the work we're doing with the Poland Atomic Authority to be able to support their regulatory review of the BWRX 300, which is one of the technologies under consideration in Poland. We're also doing a lot of work with Sweden, who is also looking at advancing some new technologies as well. Next slide, please. So looking at international collaboration, we really look at it from 3 main lenses. And so one is looking to be able to standardize regulatory review. So there's a lot of discussion about regulatory harmonization and coming to standards, common standards and common codes. And those are great long-term goals, but we don't have time to wait for harmonization of regulatory frameworks and harmonization of regulatory approaches. So we really focus on being able to strengthen our relationships, support information exchanges, and to be able to leverage previously conducted reviews or information that's out there. And so, as I said, we have a number of memorandum of cooperation, memorandum of understanding, where we are both gaining experience from our counterparts and also sharing our experiences. I think Canada, and through our trilateral agreement, has really shown that international leadership for regulatory efficiency. And so first of a kind, I say often, is slow and expensive. And there's only really any efficiencies gained if we move to a standardized design and a fleet approach. And that's efficiencies both from, a non-regulatory perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. It takes a lot of time for us to be able to do technical reviews, to confirm safety, to be able to make recommendations to our independent commissions. And so using this trilateral agreement and the specific agreement we have on the BWRX 300 has really allowed us to be able to beg, borrow, and steal the expertise and insights from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who has done some reviews on similar aspects of designs. And also for us to be able to work together on other designs that are new and novel and that are new for the 2 of us. And so that's been a very beneficial exchange. And those joint reports with the NRC are all publicly available on the NRC website. And so you can download them and review them. And finally, information sharing and staff exchanges. It's one thing to be able to conduct a joint review together, but for some of our collaborators, they don't necessarily have the capacity and capability to be able to participate in a joint review, but they have the opportunity to come and see how we're working from a project management standpoint. When you look at how you deal with large projects, how you do compliance oversight of large projects. And so we are really focusing on, making those information and staff exchanges to be meaningful on both sides. And so we have some good examples of, again, our work with Poland, where we've had them come and work with us for 2 months. We have some PAA inspectors that we're expecting to come again in the fall and come and sit with our team that's reviewing Ontario Power Generation's Darlington Nuclear Project, SMR project, to be able to gain some of those lessons learned on the ground in the challenges of project management of large, complex projects. And we really identify a need from our perspective for coordination through both the Regulatory Cooperation Forum, through the IAEA. And that's really to ensure that our long-term international engagement and working with others in collaboration is sustainable. We don't want to make a lot of commitments up front to nations that we can't then be able to satisfy. And we also want to make sure that we're not reducing our own internal efficiency by supporting and sharing information with others. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides are really, I'm going to focus on some specific work that we've been doing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the US. And so we see this as a model for international collaboration that other countries can adopt. And so it allows us to share, as I said, the expertise that the US has in boiling water reactors, which we don't have in Canada. We don't have any boiling water reactors. The BWRX-300 is an evolution of existing designs, but it has a lot of novel features as well. And so we've been able to leverage the parts that are common to the existing BWR fleet in Canada to be able to use that information to leverage in support of our license to construct application. And so an example that I give is a pretty simplistic example, is that the fuel for this reactor is commercially available. It's been validated for use across, in multiple jurisdictions. There was no need for us to go and duplicate that effort. It was available from the US. They were able to share their codes and how they came to that validation. And that saved us about 8 weeks of technical review. And when you think about how much time it takes for an expert to be able to conduct technical review, 8 weeks is a substantial gain. And so it's a quantitative number where you can say where you gain efficiency. But there's also lots of qualitative ways where we've gained efficiency in working with our partners to be able to gain their perspectives on how they've looked at various passive systems. We've been able to share our perspective on, on following the IAEA's approach for defense in depth, for example, and for safety classification. And so when we bringing in our colleagues from the UK has really allowed us to expand that collaboration, given the commonalities in the Canadian and the UK system, but also recognizing some of those differences in our own regulatory frameworks. Next slide, please. So going specifically to some of the work that we've been doing on the BWRX-300, we've really looked in our collaboration with the US NRC, and now the ONR has joined some of these activities, is to address our regulatory requirements in both countries, while also trying to minimize unnecessary design changes, to be able to support a standardized design, to be able to leverage, regulatory experience on both sides, and to support our review of the license to construct application. And our review should be available by the end of the month as we proceed forward to our licensing hearings later in October. We identified 3 initial work plans. They're there on the right. We've been able to complete many of those, and we're looking at future work plans. So looking at worker certification, is there a possibility that you can have a common operator certification program in both jurisdictions? Looking at emergency planning zones, acknowledging that those are different. The different jurisdictions have different rules on emergency planning zones, but looking at the methodologies and how we provide our guidance and our recommendations to the jurisdiction having authority for emergency planning zones, and then looking at life cycle collaboration. So from our perspective, international collaboration has got to cover the life cycle. And if it doesn't cover the life cycle, then it won't be a success. So that includes sharing compliance oversight plans, lessons learned, through the various licensing phases to be able to share that. Next slide, please. And so from a Canadian perspective, our goal is to be an efficient and effective regulator to be able to demonstrate to Canadians that these plants proposed can be safely constructed and operated. And international collaboration is one way for us to be able to gain some efficiency in our review and also to strengthen our review. And from our perspective, there's, harmonization is a long-term goal, but the activities we have in front of us which support that is our bilateral and multilateral agreements, where we'll be able to work with like-minded countries to be able to actually move the mark on harmonization, and also to support embarking countries or re-embarking countries as they look at deploying similar designs that we've reviewed in Canada and being able to share the outputs of our technical assessment. So I think I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah-Jane. From my point of view, it's quite interesting to see I've been involved in Canadian developments for a few years on the regulatory side, but from my point of view, the approach of the regulator in Canada has taken the energy consumers' needs, the energy industry's needs, and the regulators' needs together and managed to get a way of moving forward at pace, which seems to be not happening in other countries. And hopefully the collaborative approach will help people understand how to get there quicker, because there does seem to be a lot of obstacles put in the way. So we should learn a lot from the Canadian experience, I think, across the rest of the jurisdictions, particularly in emerging jurisdictions like Poland. So now we're moving on to our final presentation, which comes from Szemek and the potential application of nuclear power generation in Poland. So thank you, Szemek, for your presentation. Look forward to it. Szemek, are you still on mute?
Sorry, I didn't notice that. Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm sorry for that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Przemek Gaszkowski. I'm a lawyer, attorney at law with more than 12 years experience in legal advisory in deployment of nuclear plants. Today, I represent two companies, Nuclear PL and GNZ Legal, both introduced by Andy. What I will talk about today? It's a few points. The general brief description of Polish nuclear power program, about current status of nuclear energy projects, licensing process in Poland, brief comparison of provisions of law on NPP, large NPPs, and SMR ANT reactors, and short about accompanying investments. Polish nuclear power program, the one mentioned by Adam, it's a document adopted by our government in 2020. The objective of this program is to build and commission nuclear power plants with a total installed capacity of approximately 6 to approximately 9 gigawatts based on proven large-scale technologies. Now we've got, according to this document, there are plans for two nuclear power plants in Poland. The first one is a project of PEJ in Lubiatowo Kopalino in northern Poland. That's the one marked in blue on the slide. That's based on Westinghouse AP1000 technology. And there will be three units, 125 megawatts each. The second one, the location as well as technology are not known yet, but according to press releases, We know that that locations under under consideration are some in central Poland, in Bełchatów, in Konin. However, we are not sure the exact location. And the technology the same. We can assume that there is a choice between AP1000 of Westinghouse, HNP APR 1400, or EDF 16 EPR 1600. What is also important, we cannot find any plans for SMRs in Poland in this program. Moreover, according to this document, our government decided not to rely on SMRs in our energy mix. But what is also important, that Lee, can you yeah, we've got expected revision of this program this year. Why our government decides to do so? Can we jump to the next slide, Lee? Yeah, here you can find the programs, the projects, nuclear projects, let's say ongoing projects. That's the list made according to submitted applications and according to Polish nuclear power program. We've got here two large NPPs mentioned a moment ago. We've got also a project of private, of cooperation of private and state-owned company, PGE PAK in Konin, with technology of APR 1400. We've got 6 projects of Orlen Synthos green energy basing on GE Hitachi BWRX 300. In Western Poland, we've got the KGHM project, but here we've got several technologies under consideration. We've got also last energy free locations. However, they still do not have decisions in principle. And the last decision in principle was obtained by Industria for Rolls-Royce 470 megawatts reactor near to Kielce. Can we jump to the next slide? Okay, where are we with these projects? Here we've got a very general timeline for the construction of NPP. As you can see from the very initial state, like preliminary location indication, through whole surveys and licensing process, through construction, commissioning, and until commercial operation. The most advanced project is the one in the north of Poland, governmental one of PEJ, which obtained, it's after environmental study phase, the company obtained the environmental decision, they've got the final site approval, and now in the process of making the preliminary safety analysis report and preparing an application for the construction license. The next one is Orlen Synthos Green Energy. One of the projects received environmental impact assessment, and they are starting works on getting the environmental decision. That's the estimation of time necessary to be at the same stage where PEJ is. It's 3 to 7 years, but we believe it's of course it's possible to do it in 3 years. In fact, 7 years it's become because PEJ needed so long time to go through all the environmental issues. Other projects are after are on decision in principle stage, and they are preparing for the next steps connected with environmental surveys and site surveys. Can we jump to the next slide? How does licensing process in Poland looks like? That's maybe not the full picture, but the most important step. So here we've got the scheme is divided between nuclear regulator competences in the upper part, in the middle part, investor and non-nuclear authorities below. The first step is to get the decision principle. If you have it after the project brief, you can ask the General Directorate of Environmental Protection for scope of for definition of scope of environmental impact assessment. When you have it, you can start with environmental surveys and EIA report, which ends with environmental decision, which is necessary to get the final site approval. In the meantime, you can start the site survey and site report, which lasts at least 2 years. And this document, together with preliminary safety analysis report, is necessary to get construction license. It's kind of certification in Poland. In the meantime, you can ask the regulator for general opinion on any aspect connected to the technology, to the safety standards, to the security measurements, and so to the procedures, and so on and so on. It's type of pre-licensing in Poland, to be honest. It's treated as pre-licensing. If you have the opinion of National Atomic Agency on some issue, it's type of confirmation that your solution is proper one. And after construction license and civil design, which might be made during this stage, you can get the building permit, and that's the last step to start the construction phase. Can we jump to the next slide? What type of nuclear energy facilities requiring licenses? As listed here, power plants, research reactors, some installations of spent fuel and radioactive waste, as well as accompanying investments. Next slide, please. The last one, what is it? It's power grids, roads, railways, other necessary infrastructure. According to Polish law, we've got some facilitations to make such projects in terms of acquiring the land or to facilitate the administrative procedure. Sorry. Next slide, please. That's the overview map of accompanying investments for the first project in Poland. Here you can see railways, new roads here, brand new pier for purpose of construction of the power plant. What is not matched on this map is the power grid, which will be on the right side, and the size of this power grids would be quite impressive, since in the neighborhood of our first nuclear power plant there will be few offshore projects. Next slide, please. About the costs. Here we've got a specification of fees for administrative decisions and approvals, which starts from 100,000 zloty, which is around 25,000 euro for final site approval, through more expensive licenses necessary to start up a power plant and to operate. And the highest one is 5 million, which is around 125 million euro for construction's license fee. Of course, we've got other costs connected with the project, like surveys, tests, insurances, financial costs, labor cost, and so on, and of course external experts. And since we've got, we can see some shortage of nuclear experts in Poland. That might be also a quite expensive position. Next slide, please. Large NPPs versus SMR anti-reactors. According to Polish law, there is no differences between these types of power plants. So it means that deployment of any SMR ANP reactor requires the same decisions as deployment of the large unit. There are some
2
minor...
minutes, please, Przemek, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will manage that. What is worth to mention, and it's not, and that's not the common knowledge, is that Polish law doesn't prohibit construction of first of a kind plants, and sometimes we can hear that it prohibits. No. The technology must be proven by proper tests and analyses, and it doesn't have to be next of a kind technology. So that's a plus for SMR stakeholders. There are also several attempts to provide some facilitations. For example, now Polish government announced that there will be some changes in Polish law, allowing investor and contractor to make preparatory works like excavations and other type of works which are necessary to start the proper phase of construction. Next slide, please. So to conclude, we believe there is a huge potential in deployment of nuclear energy in Poland. We see, as Adam mentioned, we've got each Polish political power supports energy, nuclear energy. The Polish society, the support for nuclear power is around 90%. We've got huge need to replace conventional power plants by stable large units. Moreover, except these units, we've got a huge need of industry companies as well as energy producers for smaller units like SMRs, and we see a quite big interest in this type of technology. What more, Poland has the biggest heating network in European Union, which shall be decarbonized, and that's also a potential field for suppliers of nuclear technologies. We can say that Polish nuclear law is quite complex, but of course, good practices from foreign companies, foreign legal systems might be adopted to make our processes more effective. I think we are quite open to hear on that. However, safety standards are. We know that safety standards are the most important in this area, and that cannot be broken by any new solutions. Of course, as was said by Adam and by me, we see several challenges in terms of financing process, in terms of insufficient human resources, lack of nuclear experts, but that might be, we believe there is a place to discuss on that and to support potential stakeholders by, for example, companies like ours, Nuclear PL, GNC or CTL. Thank you very much. If there are any questions or comments, on the next slide, you may find my contact details. Please feel free to ask me.
Okay, thank you, Przemek. That's really interesting, and actually, there's quite a few points come out of that, which if we have time, I'll come back to a specific question about the first of a kind law. We have a lot of questions to ask. The first one is really directed at Adam, and that's to do with your comment about grid and district heating systems, because as Przemek just mentioned, there is a very large heating system in district heating system in Poland, but you mentioned that restricts the ability to develop nuclear, perhaps. Can you
Well,
explain?
What I meant is that power generation is going to be the primary application for nuclear. What we need in Poland is a lot of clean power. Now, there is no consensus at the moment how big Polish nuclear power program should be, but the existing there might be some revisions. However, so far we've always been assuming 6 to 9 gigawatts as a bare minimum to launch the program, and now it will be concentrated in a few plants. Even with SMRs, it's not like those plants are going to be tiny. So of course they don't have to be 3 gigawatts a piece. There could be plants which will be 1 gigawatt or even half a gigawatt. But half gigawatt electrical still means nearly a gigawatt thermal output potentially. So yes, we will be using in some locations, perhaps that will depend on location, some heat generated by those plants. However, this is not going to be the main function. This is going to be mostly a side effect, because even if we decided to deploy those commercially available SMR projects in a more distributed fashion, those projects will still have much more heat than needed pretty much anywhere, perhaps except for 2-3 largest cities, and siting those plants next to a big city is going to be a challenge in itself. The first ones are surely not going to be sited very close to cities. So it's that. Of course, zero emission heat is a very good thing. We should do that. We should utilize that, but it'll be for now more of a side effect, and primarily it's going to be electricity.
Okay, we only have a few minutes, 4 minutes left. Mohammed Hassan, hi Mohammed, very pleased you could join us. I'm going to ask you a question. It was directed to Karen, but it may be that Przemek can pick up on this also, and Adam perhaps. Is that once a technology vendor is selected, how would the international collaboration approach apply to supporting capitalization of the project based on a technology? So how do you see that impacting on the capitalization based on the model that Karen spoke about? Przemek, or Adam, were you going to pick that up? If you're speaking, you're on mute, I think.
Adam?
Sorry, I don't think I got the clue of the question. I must say.
Okay. Well, I think it's directed to Karen, so we'll get written answers into these questions for everyone.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I have a somewhat day off today. I mean, I'm a little bit sick and I think slowly, but certainly, okay. If from the Polish point of view, some internationalization, of course, might mean that we are not doing the same thing twice or 3 times or 5 times if we deploy technology in many countries. It's as simple as that. We have done that in aviation.
No. Okay. And then I've got a question I've got still a few questions, but I think the fairest way to do that is for us to get the questions tabulated and written answers. But there was one point that Przemek mentioned, a specific legal point, in being a lawyer, you'd expect me to pick that up. And that's to do with the first of a kind law, preventing the deployment of first of a kind technologies in Poland. Does that mean that any technology which is going to be built, like a new gigawatt reactor, which will effectively be on-site constructed in Poland, would be looked at as first of a kind and therefore suffer significant challenges in getting approval? as opposed to a factory-built modular reactor, which is operating elsewhere, which could potentially be delivered as an operating model, as a factory-based operating model?
Yes, in fact, yes, Andy. Actually, at the moment, we all of SMR reactors are first of a kind. So, according to Polish law, we do not. We are working on several projects now. And we can see suppliers from whole the world. So we've got SMRs under consideration. We've got GE Hitachi BW RX 300. We've got Rolls-Royce 470. We've got Lost Energy reactors. We've got NewScale under consideration. We've got EDF Newark. So basically, all of these are first of a kind, and all of them are in play for deployment in Poland, and that's allowed by our law.
Okay. One other question for you, Przemek. You mentioned decision in principle. How long does it take in Poland to get a decision in principle?
Few months. You've got basically it should take around 3 months, but usually it takes a little bit more. So to get it, you need to when you apply for that, there is necessary to get opinions of Polish security services and Ministry of Treasury, and sometimes it takes time. But basically it's few months. So let's say it's around half a year. Yeah.
Okay. And then another question for everyone, I think. In the UK, we see that the cost of large nuclear projects, cost of capital for large nuclear projects is about 33% of the overall project cost. Are there any indications that that will be different in Poland? How do you expect the capital costs to be managed to make the projects more viable in Poland? It's the danger of throwing out a question to everyone that no one answers, but there's an economist on the line, so she might pick that up.
Maybe I should try to answer partially, at least.
Thank you, Michelle.
The cost of the project depends on many things. One of it is the business model used to kind of support the project from the state, or used to finance the investment phase, and also make sure for banks and for investors that in future, when the nuclear power plant is starting to work, it will be enough a revenue to cover all the capital costs, and even there is something left for the investor. So if we take into account the enormous amount of what's the name of percent we have to pay for the debt, it means that in the cost of the production of every megawatt hour, a big part, even 2/3, it means about 60-70% of the cost, it is a rate paid to the debtor. So we have to think clearly about what capital structure we should involve in our thinking, and we also have to think about the whole business model, because capital structure, the capital model is not the whole thing. It only says who is the investor who gave the money for the investment process and who wants to be paid back after or even before the nuclear power plant starts to work. When I said even before, I meant a RAP model, in which the investor is paid before even the nuclear power plant starts to work. So it's a very big question, and the SACHO model is a proposition to investor to think about and maybe to implement, because it makes possible for the end user to get the cheap energy, and we know it from our kilowatt 3 from Finland. The cost of production is about 40 euro per 1 megawatt hour, and in Great Britain, for example, it's the same technology. Yes, we can say it's the same technology, and the cost of production, expected cost of production in
HPC, Hinkley Point.
Hinkley Point C is about, let me remember, 100 of British
112.
pound. So the difference is not in technology. The big difference is in a business model. So it's a really great thing.
Okay, thank you, Bożena. That's very interesting, and I think it just confirms that we need to find ways to make the cost of capital a lot less than it is in the UK. I think we should tie up our webinar there for today. We're running 5 or 6 minutes behind schedule anyway. Thank you to all of the panelists. Just a reminder that we will make the presentations available online from our website. We will be posting the recording of the presentations on YouTube, and we will be posting a link to the question and answers. And there are many more questions and answers than we've been able to get through. So thank you to everyone for joining and participating, particularly to the participants in the panel group who have put in a lot of time. So if you feel like sending them a little chat message to say thank you, that would be much appreciated. So thank you, everyone. We'll close down the webinar from there, and we will hopefully see you all again in the near future.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.